Hey, it's Dario again. As you know, we're building my K24 all-wheel drive Civic, and we're putting together the engine, and I wanted to do a separate video on just the Vtec Killer setups, how you do the valve train when you're taking a economy I-vtec engine and turning it into a performance type VTEC engine with the Vtec Killer setup. I found a lot of information on the internet and it was kind of scattered all over, so I decided to do a video just on the Vtec Killer, showing what rockers work, what don't, what has to be ground, what has to be changed, kind of what's available and what you need to do. So we're gonna go from here and I'll show you the different rockers, we'll show you the different how the cam sets up and what your options are to do this. I wanted to do this separate because this is more like tech just for guys who are looking to do Vtec Killer setup. But if you're wanting to learn something new, stay tuned and we'll go through it all. So obviously this is K24a1. So this is the economy VTEC, where it kicks in at about 2600 RPM. There's also the K20a2, K20z3, and K24a8 that all use like the VTEC that you would normally have in like a B series. This is more of the economy VTEC, and how it works is this only has, normally they call it a 3-lobe cam, so it'll have 1, 2, 3 lobes on the performance VTEC, and then it'll have 3 rocker arms. The middle rocker arm floats on like a lost motion adjuster, which is all it is just a little spring to keep it up riding on the lobe. And then the 2 outer runs run on a smaller lobe, just on the low, they call it the low cam. So that's when you're just like cruising around, putting around, usually up to about 3,000 or 4,000 RPM, they kick it in. This one, it kicks in at like 2,200 RPM, plus the little one just kind of opens the valve just a little bit to keep the fuel running. Then on the exhaust, it has no VTEC, it just has one single lobe that opens all the time, and then it just opens the 2 valves. And this is the type of rocker you use for the Vtec Killer setup. So the K24a1, A4, A8, and there's probably a couple, the K20a3 is another one, comes with this economy VTEC setup. So these are about 40 horsepower down over the performance VTEC. So by putting the K20a2 cams or K24a2 cams in these engines and running them on only the VTEC lobe, on only the middle lobe, they'll usually pick up about 40 wheel horsepower NA, because it gives you that extra power band by carrying the RPM of the bigger cam lobe. I just wanted to explain the 3 lobe and the 2 lobe a little bit deeper in how the VTEC works. So whether it's a 3 lobe or a 2 lobe, it has this little pin that slides out when the VTEC activates. So it's controlled by oil pressure. There's a shaft that runs down through here, and it has little holes in it that it fills with oil pressure when the VTEC kicks in. When the VTEC kicks in, the oil comes down here, slides this pin out, it slides into this end of the rocker and locks these 2 rockers together. So then it goes from riding on this little lobe and the big lobe on the economy VTEC to just riding on the big lobe, and this one just, there's a gap. On the performance VTEC, there's 2, so there'd be 1 here and 1 here, and this one wouldn't be connected to the valve, and it does the same kind of thing. This middle one floats on the lost motion adjuster like I talked about, and then when the oil pressure kicks in, it locks this rocker, the other rocker on the other side, and then just these ones don't touch the roller and they just ride on the bigger lobe. Okay, I'm gonna go over the different options for rockers that you can use for the Vtec Killer setup. These are all exhaust rockers off of different K-series engines. Different guys use them in different ways. I don't really know if these things will work on a regular, some guys do Vtec Killer on like a regular K20a2 engine. I don't really see the point why. Because if you already have the real Vtec, why would you really bother doing the Vtec Killer setup? This is just kind of to make a peasant K series into a rockstar one. So these are the 3-4-ish different types of rockers that I've read that people have used. So this first one, this is a K20a3. So this was off of like a 02, early 03 engine out of like an RSX. So this is the one style. Apparently where I marked it here on the red, it rubs. That's one thing we're gonna look at when we do the mock-up. This uses like a separate washer that doesn't clip on just because of the style of the rocker. And yeah, but apparently you can take these from the exhaust side of your K20a3 and put them on the intake side, and they don't have to be ground, but apparently they have to be ground on the exhaust side. So we're gonna mock up 8 of them and see how that works out. The next one, these are kind of a newer deal. This is a K24Z3. It's 08 and newer Honda Accords and 09 and newer TSXs. It's a really weird K-series head. It has the integral exhaust manifold and stuff like that. And then it only has 3-lobe VTEC on the intake side, but the cam is completely different, so you can't use it in an older K-series. You can only use up to an 08 TSX K24 cam. So as you can see, this has a wider lobe here, so it kind of matches the lobe on the high cam on the VTEC style cams. The only thing I read about is with these ones, you can only use them with the small spring diameter that like a K20a3 or K24a1, A4, A8 uses. They use 2 different diameters. The double springs use a bigger diameter, outer diameter, and the other ones use a smaller diameter. So the problem with that is on here is this is wider than the older style ones, and it interferes with the retainer that sits right here. So the retainer will end up rubbing on here with the bigger diameter, but it shouldn't rub with the smaller diameter spring on it. On the actual K24Z3s, they use like a stepped retainer on the spring, which it has the outer diameter of a double spring, but the retainer itself is stepped down, and then the coil or the valve spring is a little bit shorter than the earlier style double springs or the big springs. So next up is the standard K24a1, A4, A8. I'm not sure of the other ones that these fit. This one was out of an Accord. It has a T on it. This one was out of my K24a1, and it has a Y on it, but they look identical. Like I don't see any real difference in them. So they can either have a T or a Y, and they're pretty much the same. It might have been one was made in Japan and one was made somewhere else, or whatever like that. So these ones, we're gonna do a mock-up because apparently they rub on the inside here. So like the lobe kind of swipes through the middle of here and touches the sides, whereas on like the economy VTEC, the lobe is really narrow, so it doesn't touch it, so that's not an issue. But with that, you usually have to grind in here and in here on either all four of them on the exhaust side, or all 8 of them. That's what we're gonna kind of find out. And this one here is one that I went by pictures on the internet and I just grounded out kind of what they said. I think it's a little excessive for what you have to do. People were saying that it weakens the rocker arm. I have no issue of taking off this material. If you started having to go down the side here, it would probably be a big deal, because then you're starting to take away the strut that goes across from the main part of the rocker to the inside of the rocker, like on this side here too. But this is just one of these ones, and I just ground it down just to try it out. I have 4 of those that I did. So what we're gonna do, this is all based off of a K20a2 cam, which is a 3-lobe Vtec cam. I've also seen they say that these little tabs on these thrust washers touch too, so we'll have a look at that when we get it mocked up. But first I'm gonna mock up the K24Z3 ones, and then we'll try all the other ones and kind of see what they said and see what needs to be ground and what doesn't need to be ground. So I ended up pulling the head off the engine. It was just easier. I have some Brian Crower, the part number is a BC1050. It's a drop-in valve spring for the small diameter retainer heads, the single spring, small diameter springs. I tested a couple of factory springs out of these heads, and the pressures are like super low. So if you're planning on using the full advantage of having these big duration high lobe cams in them, you're probably going to be spinning it higher, so you definitely want some more spring pressure. They're like $150 a set on eBay. It's very cheap insurance. And I've noticed from some of the research that I've done, a lot of people drop valves in K-series from revving them too much with inadequate, I'm thinking with an inadequate spring pressure. Some guys get away with it. A lot of those K24s and K20s, they're making huge power on stock stuff, but that doesn't mean it's proper. So here it is with the, I got the K24Z3 rockers. These are the wide lobe ones, as you can see here. So like I said, like it doesn't use that lobe or that lobe, that's the low side lobe. It only uses the high side lobe, which on a 3-lobe setup normally kicks in around $4 or $5 grand, depending on where the Vtec is set up. This works perfect. I can't really get in there with a light. Maybe I'll grab a flashlight here. It clears, no grinding, no nothing. You can buy these new from Honda still, because I think they're somewhat current. They're not that cheap. You can get them on eBay too. There's a bunch of different ways of doing this, but like the thing about it is you don't want to go too crazy, because you're just trying to just get more power out of an engine that wasn't meant to rev. So these heads, this is the K24a1 head. Apparently they flow just as good as the K20a2 to an extent. So this is pretty much like doing a K20a2 head, like a Frankenstein head swap, but just using it in Vtec Killer mode. So it should still make the same peak horsepower as a K20a2 head swap, but it just will have more chop and stuff at idle, because obviously when you're only running on the big lobe, it makes it a bigger cam. If you search on YouTube, there's a bunch of guys with like idle clips with their Vtec Killer setups. And obviously you can see by the different sizes of the lobe, this lobe is pretty small and that one's a lot bigger, pretty much significantly bigger. I think it's at 50, it's about 30 or 40 degrees more duration and a bunch more lift, like 450 lift. So a lot of guys don't do the aftermarket cams with the Vtec Killer setup, mostly because they get pretty aggressive with the cam lobes on the aftermarket cams, which makes it really hard for it to idle and get a good stable idle and get good off idle drivability and stuff. So even I seen some guys complaining the 06 to 08 TSX cams are like one of the biggest cams that you can get, factory Honda cam. And some guys were complaining of putting those in a K20a3 and having a really shitty idle because the cams were just too big for the engine at idle. So yeah, so first up, these are the K24Z3 rockers. They work perfect on all eight. Like they're not touching now, and they have way too much adjustment So like it's 8 thou and 12 thou, 8 thou on the intake and 12 thou on the exhaust, somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that. So with these all the way up and probably like an 8 thou gap, there's more than enough retainer clearance. Let me just grab a flashlight here. It's hard to see, but on these K24 Z3 rockers, the main complaint was the bottom of the rocker touching the retainer. So with this setup, it's the same as the K-Mod Performance. They sell these as a no grind rocker. So that's where I kind of got the idea to get them from. So this is definitely verified that it doesn't rub on the retainer. And then I'm just gonna spin the cam over and make sure it doesn't rub on the sides of the intake of these lobes on the rocker. So I'm gonna do that. I verified everything. I rolled over the cams and checked, and there's no contact anywhere. A couple of places are a little bit close with the excessive clearance right now, but once the valves are set, it'll be fine. Everything is a lot closer on the exhaust side. That's where everybody says the rubbing does happen. You can see, I don't know if you can see down there, it gets really close to that shim, but there still is a gap. But if you actually had TSX cams, the primary lobe is bigger on a TSX cam, so it would probably hit those clips and knock the little tabs off, but not on this one. So the K24 Z3 rockers will work completely unmodified with K20a2 cams in this cylinder head. So those first ones have been verified. We got the K20a3 early style rockers mocked up on the intake and in the exhaust side, and they went in pretty easy. It's a little bit more of you have to mess around a little more to get all the shims, because the shims just are kind of loose and floating, so you have to line them up, versus the other style rockers, they're all clipped to the rocker arm itself. So on the intake side, it's perfect. And the reason why there's a difference between the intake side and the exhaust side is the cams aren't centered. Like you can see it right here. This cam is this way. This cam is kind of, well, they're both kind of this way, but this cam, the intake cam, is centered over the roller, where this cam isn't. I don't know if they did that because of space or just to change the geometry, because depending on where the cam is, it depends on how much lift you get, even off of the same lobe. So on the intake side, it clears no issues, like definitely no issues on the bottom, and no issues rubbing these two lobes on the rocker itself. So there's tons of clearance, no issues. So if you needed to get a set of 4 of these, if you had a K20a3, you could get another set of 4 of these, throw them on the intake side, and on the intake side, they will not require any grinding. On the exhaust side is a different story. So on the exhaust side, you can see in there, the side lobe is actually touching to the point that the middle lobe is not touching the roller. Let's see if I can get in there. If you go like this, I'm spinning the roller because it's not touching this lobe. This lobe is touching the edge of the rocker. So like I showed before on my layout of the rocker, that's where you have to clearance from the side. Like just take a little bit off of here, and it doesn't even look like it needs that much. I'd have no issue. These are pretty beefy rockers in themselves, but also a little more rare because they were only out for a year or two and only in the K20a3 engines from what I've seen. I've pulled apart a lot of 03. I pulled apart 03 RSXs with the K20a3. I've pulled apart Accords with the K20a4s, and none of them have this rocker. The only one I've ever found them in is the early style K20a3. All right, so here's our final setup. So in this, I have the first 4 rockers. These 4 here are clearanced, pre-clearance. I only had 4 of them ready, so I kind of did a double mock-up on this one. So these 4 are pre-clearanced. These 2 are the T's from the K24a4 out of the Accord. And then these are the Y, they say Y on them, from the K24a1, which was actually out of this head. So these ones, the clearanced ones clear fine. You just gotta make sure you clearance them enough and they will clear the lobe. So grinding is definitely necessary on these ones. On the unclearanced T's and Y's, they both rub in the exact same way. So they're the exact same rocker, they rub in the exact same places, and I'll just show you here if I can. So if you look down, it's hard to see. Let's see if I can see it from behind. You can kind of see there, the edge of the lobe is contacting the edge of the rocker. Like the lobe is too wide to fit in between the rocker it's supposed to fit in that hole. Like on these ones you can see I have them clearanced out, so there's enough room there for them to clear without rubbing. On the exhaust side, it's even worse. So like, because of the geometry of the exhaust side, you can see, let's see if I can get a good light in there. It's rubbing hard. Like there's a 1/4 inch gap there between the roller and the cam. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up now that we've put this thing and taken it apart a million times, these are the early K20a3. No grinding necessary on the intake. This is all based off of K20a2 cams, which are the most popular ones, I'm gonna say, for Vtec Killer, because they're pretty abundant. So no grinding on the intake side. On the exhaust side, you have to grind them right there where I have the red mark. It doesn't look like it needs much. So pretty straightforward there. The K20Z3, no grinding on the standard economy I-vtec and K-series engines. So you don't have to grind them on the intake, you don't have to grind them on the exhaust, as long as you're using the stock size diameter valve spring and retainer. None of these other rockers matter on that side. It's only this one with the wider lobe that matters. If you were gonna run some Supertech dual valve springs, you definitely wanna be checking that, because I bet you it's gonna be pretty close. And then these were the K24a1, A4, A8. Obviously, they rub like crazy. You can actually see the mark that they left when I was trying to turn it over. There it goes, it focused. But yeah, so it was trying to pile its way through there, and I honestly think if you didn't check clearance on these, they would probably destroy your valve train on startup. So the T or the Y, so any year from 2003 up to, I'm gonna say 2008, I don't know when they stopped making the A8 engines, I think it's 2008, they're all gonna have this or the Y, like the T or the Y style rocker, and you're gonna have to grind them if you're using them on the intake or the exhaust, whatever, like I showed here. So you just gotta grind them out so it starts just under the side of the lobe and goes wide pretty much right to that edge, and you'll be golden. So you either do it that way, or you buy a set that's already clearanced, or you buy one of these other sets. These ones are really hard to get, obviously, because these engines are only like 10 years old and most of the cars are probably still rolling around. You're not really gonna find these in the junkyard yet. I just got lucky. So if these pop up, these would be my first choice, these would be my second choice, and then these would be my third choice, but obviously you'd have to grind it. So that kind of wraps things up for the Vtec Killer setup. we're gonna be doing some other stuff to the engine. That's gonna be a totally separate video. I have a bunch of parts coming, but I just wanted to do this in the interim before the parts came. And yeah, so this is kind of, if you have any comments or questions, comment below and I'll try to answer them. And if you know any other information, it would be great to have that in the comments. So when people clicked on this video, they could kind of get everything in a one-stop shop and not have to watch 20 or 30 different videos to get the information that I tried to gather here. So thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, hit the bell so you get the notifications, and we'll see you next time.